Hello, and welcome to Paper Tray Inc.'s Stamp-a-Faire 2017. I'm Jessica Frost-Ballas from All the Sparkle, and today I'll be sharing a project using the 8th anniversary traditional gift of bronze as inspiration. Before starting my project, I did a little research about bronze and discovered that it can range in color from greenish gold to red gold or even a chocolate brown, and the age and patina of the bronze will affect the overall color. So I decided to play with various shades of bronze on my card, and I encourage you to do the same. We're going to start by creating some gilded leaves using the palm print stamp set from Paper Tray Inc. I die cut the leaves several times using tropical teal cardstock, and then I laid one of the negatives inside my MISTI. I arranged the palm print stamps on the lid of my MISTI and then inlaid my die cut leaves inside the negative. I inked the stamps with tropical teal dye ink and stamped them on the die cuts for a tone-on-tone look. I didn't ink my stamps well the first time, so I re-inked them and stamped again. Then I removed my die cuts from the negative and repeated the process with the rest of my die cut leaves. To keep the die cuts in place, I simply placed a few strips of post-it tape on the back of the negative. I let the dye ink dry on the cardstock for a few minutes while I created a custom embossing powder. I didn't have a bronze embossing powder, so I mixed brass and copper embossing powder in a coffee filter. After combining the two, I decided to add a little gold embossing powder to brighten it up and then set that aside. Next, I worked on the sentiment. I adhered stick-it adhesive to the back of a piece of tropical teal cardstock and a scrap of metallic bronze cardstock. I die cut the sentiment from boho rounds 4 times from the tropical teal cardstock and once from the bronze cardstock. I peeled the backing off the adhesive and adhered the die cut words together to create a thick, almost chipboard-like sentiment. I topped the teal layers with the bronze cardstock. Then it was time to gild my leaves. I placed the leaves back inside the negative in my MISTI and prepped them with a powder tool. I squirted a tiny bit of Versamark inker on an acrylic block and used a cheap flat paintbrush to add Versamark to the edges of the stamps. You could achieve a similar look by swiping a Versamark pad across the die cuts, but I prefer the detail I can get with a paintbrush. For the most part, I followed the natural curves of the leaves and the veins and stems of each leaf. It's hard to see on the stamps themselves, but you'll see how the leaves emboss in a few seconds. A little goes a very long way with this technique, so apply the Versamark lightly. You can always go back and add more. Once I applied Versamark to all of the stamps, I closed the lid and stamped the leaves. You don't need a stamp positioner to do this technique, but it does make it easier to do a bunch of stamps at the same time. As you can see, I decided to go back and add a little more Versamark to each stamp. And if you look closely, you can see the Versamark edging on the stamp leaves as it shows up a little darker. Once I was happy with the Versamark coverage, I sprinkled each leaf with the embossing powder, tapped off the excess, and melted it with my heat gun. Each leaf looks a little different, and you'll never get the same effect twice, which I just love. After all of my leaves were embossed, I decided to add a bronze patina to my tropical teal card panel, so I placed it on a piece of scrap paper and then swiped my Versamark pad lightly about 2/3 of the way across the panel. I scooped my embossing powder over the panel, tapped off the excess, and heat embossed it. Then it was time to assemble my card. I played around with my leaf arrangement, and then when I was happy with it, I used a piece of press and seal to pick up the leaves. I turned it over and applied ATG adhesive to the back of the leaves. picked up the press and seal again, arranged the leaves over the panel, and pressed down. I made sure to firmly press to make sure the adhesive was really stuck to the card panel before peeling off the press and seal. Off camera, I adhered the panel to an A2 card base of white cardstock. You'll see that I also ended up adding one more leaf to the bottom right corner and then trimmed off the edges of the leaves that went over the side of the card panel. I arranged the sentiment over the card, removed the adhesive backing, and adhered the sentiment. Finally, I added a few chocolate brown gemstones across the card panel. You could also use Nouveau drops, stickles, or sequins for a similar effect. Lots of bronze inspiration in the gilded leaves, the background patina, the metallic cardstock, the custom embossing powder, and the embellishments. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you're enjoying Stamp-a-Faire and that you'll link up a card using my bronze gilding technique. Have a fabulous day and happy crafting!